Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the podium Colonel Mike Black, U.S. Air Force retired, Vice President for Defense, AFCEA International.
You can clap. All right, so those that know me know we have a little test before any panel that I introduce. It's audience participation. In the military, we call it sounding off. So I'm going to give you a preparatory command in a great Hawaiian style, and you'll respond with a loud and thunderous aloha. So I'm going to say aloha, and you're going to respond with a loud and thunderous. And if we don't get it right, I will do it again until we get it right. So I want to make sure everybody down the hall can hear us down there in 301. Aloha! That was pretty good. We're going to do it one more time just to get a teeny bit louder. Aloha! Aloha! All right, well done. I want to thank you for joining this afternoon's panel, this industry panel. It's entitled AI, or Artificial Intelligence and ML, Machine Learning, as a Warfighter Advantage. Okay, and moderating this afternoon's panel is Lieutenant General Susan Lawrence, United States Army, retired. She is our AFCEA International President and CEO. I know most of you are very familiar with General Lawrence's remarkable Army career, in which she advanced from E1 to O9 and retired as the Army CIO G6. And after retiring from the Army, she moved to industry, first working for Booz Allen and then for Accenture Federal Services. She joined AFCEA in 2022 as AFCEA's International's first female president and CEO. And I'm very honored. Yeah, that's worth a woohoo. Who did that? Okay. I'm very honored to call her my boss, and I'm also going to throw a quarter in the jar because I'm calling her General Lawrence, and that's worth a quarter in the jar every time I do that. But over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thanks for all the hard work that you put into this. And you know, I really thought, Mike is Air Force, but you know, this season the Army and the Navy are undefeated. And so it was more supposed to be go Army, beat Navy here in a couple of weeks. Just saying. I know what country I'm in and what space I'm in, but it'll be a great competition on that field. But aloha, everyone, and thank you for being here. As you know, this is our first year moving here to the Convention Center. We just ran out of room at the Hawaiian Village. And in fact, we had 60 of our teammates, industry members, on a wait list, and there was just nowhere else to go. And so we made the call to move down here. So we apologize for any of those upfront snafus we're kind of going through in the growing pains, but we'll have it all down by next year as we come back over. But I'm so excited about being here and being able to support industry and their desires to even have larger space than the 10 by 10 they were held to there at the Hawaiian Village. So very excited about it as we go forth. And to be part of the 39th. Linda, what are we going to do for the 40th anniversary? We got to think about that. But very excited about the 39th TechNet INDOPAC and being a part of this as we go forward. But again, the value of us all being here is the networking, and I hear a lot of networking going on and down on the floor, a lot of noise there, and so that's the good news of why we're here. So thank you very much. As I have always said, and every time I get up on the podium, I'm very thankful for our industry partners. We would not be here without our industry partners, and we appreciate all that you do and taking the time and the resources to come to these events, to meet with government and academia and talk about the challenges out there. And if you weren't at the luncheon, we can get it to you, but General Flynn threw a QR code up there that says, here's my challenges to industry. And so I hope that you were able to capture that and take a look at that. So again, they know how important, the Indo-Pacific Command knows how important industry is to our success here in the theater, and you will hear that from Admiral Papar on the last day as well, as we go through. So walk through, see our exhibits or our education events that are going on here on this floor. Very exciting. And I am really, as we talked about, and I know we can't capture, when we had our prep session, that was a great discussion we had. And so I'm so excited about continuing the discussion on artificial intelligence, machine learning as a warfighting advantage. And that's what we're going to focus on today. And when we put this out to industry, you know, it's hard to pick, you know, who do we put on the panel, the industry panels. And 139 industry partners responded to it. So I'm excited about our panel today and what they brought different in their thinking on this effort and hearing about them today. So with that, I'm going to ask each of our panelists up front to talk about the topic, a little bit about themselves, their background as they go through that. And so our first in the chute is Dr. Teresa Melvin, a quantum researcher and Aerospike's global field CTO for HPC and AI. Over to you, ma'am.
Hello, my name is Teresa, and I am a quantum researcher, and I am also I'm an end-to-end AI pipeline developer. So I work at Exascale, and at Exascale, the use cases, they overlap between public sector and private sector, such that all the data is high dimensional, which is laser, LiDAR, Doppler, radar. And so this makes developing really, really difficult because there's just not a lot of tools out there. And the one tool that I've worked with for years at the front end is Aerospike, and that's because it's written in C. And when you ingest at the front end, you need C-based tools because this high-dimensional data, it moves really, really fast. So the one thing that Aerospike is, well, it's actually two things. One, it's a database company. And the other thing that it is I'm sorry, I've got a note here. I was supposed to have it memorized, and I completely forgot to memorize it. But it's written entirely in C, so it's fast, and it just plain works right out of the box. But in my tactical edge pipelines, it works when it is in DDIL configurations. So when it loses communication, it continues to work. And it also has the ability to only send data once, which is another reason that I use the product. As a C programmer, I have to hand code all of this. And I had been hand coding this for years and years and years until I found this tool. So that is another reason that I've used it for years. But yeah, so that's a little bit about why I use this product. I onboarded with the company to help them ramp up their generative AI program. And I've been in high performance computing for a long time. And I now fuse classical AI and quantum AI pipelines together. So thank you.
Thank you. Ed, welcome. We have with us Ed, I'm going to put my glasses on, a little small. Barnabas, Vice President, Indo-Pacific CTO for Booz Allen Hamilton, fellow workmate of mine. So over to you, sir.
Yeah, well, aloha, everybody. My name is Ed Barnabas, and as Susan said, I'm Vice President and the Indo-Pacific CTO for our business. I am not a quantum researcher, so I'll have to defer any of those questions over to Teresa. But I think one thing I wanted to share, I think, for a lot of folks in the audience is that I am a technologist, but I'm not a classically trained AI engineer. And I think a lot of us who have long history in terms of developing systems or architectures or solutions, how we grapple with and integrate AI is kind of the most important thing I think that we're all faced with today. And I tend to approach it much like an end user would, in terms of the impact, in terms of the value, and hopefully with a little bit of healthy skepticism as well. And I'm really excited to be on this panel because I can't walk into any mission space or talk to any of our clients without someone talking about or asking about the importance of data superiority and how we're going to integrate machine learning and AI. So just really, really excited to be on this panel with these wonderful folks that I just met a few minutes ago. But I did meet virtually a few weeks ago, and just excited to be here, so thank you.
Thank you. And on the screen, you see, I think it's up there, where you can dial in your questions. So we'd love to hear from you and your thoughts, and challenge our panel a little bit on our discussion as we go forward. So next to Ed, we have Trey Coleman, the Chief Product Officer for Raft.
Thanks, General. I'll put a quarter in the jar also.
There you go.
Thanks for having me. Thanks to AFCEA for putting on a great conference here and for all the support you give our nation and our national defense. And thanks to all of you for being here in this room, whether you're wearing an Aloha shirt or the uniform. You know, we're all here for the same purpose, and that's to defend our nation and our way of life and make this nation the amazing nation that it is. So thanks for being a great teammate in that. My name is Trey Coleman. I am the Chief Product Officer at Raft. Prior to Raft, I spent my entire career in the Air Force executing C2. So I was the AWACS Squadron Commander in Okinawa. I commanded the KAC and LUD for 2 years. I was one of the fortunate folks, got to bring my family out to Doha, and they lived in Doha, and we commanded the KAC for a couple of years, and then commanded the Air Force's C2 wing, where we did all the C2 experimentation and operational testing. And through that course of my career, what I really learned was that it's the applications and the weapon systems are not, that's not where it's at, right? They're always going to be slow, they're always going to be delayed, they're always going to lag. What matters is the data. And I learned that when in 2019 and 20, when I was at the KAC, and we knew the tensions with Iran were escalating, and if you remember, it was January 6th of 2020 when Iran launched 17 theater ballistic missiles at Al Asad Air Base. And we knew we were next, right? So depending on how we responded, we expected that the KAC would be the next target. And so we spent a few months prior to that trying to put as much workload out of our on-prem data center into the cloud so that we could move our people wherever they needed to be. And actually, there's a guy out there, Angel Textor, who I've known for a long time, who was in our AOC that we had moved to Shaw around that same time. And so we were able to successfully do that, and we even used a lot of great I/O. We brought in Washington Post and Al Jazeera and showed them an empty ops floor, to try to deter Iran, saying we can continue our mission from anywhere. But what it was about, it was not about the applications, it was about the data. And so when I retired, I wanted to go work for a company that was really good at data. And so Raft is a woman-owned small business that really excels at digital engineering and is providing data platforms, data solutions for C3BM and largely Air Force and other customers who are doing supporting C2 warfighting. And so I'm excited to be here, excited to be a part of Raft, and we're excited to make a difference in the way we fight.
Great, thank you. Becky, good to see you again. Becky Fair is our Senior Vice President for Information Advantage at 26 Technologies.
Yeah, thank you. Good to see you again as well. And as Trey said, thank you all for having us here, and thank you all for your service and participation. I myself am a former CIA officer. Don't hold that against me. I've got a mixture of private and public sector background, so I'm a Russia hand by training. I also am an entrepreneur. So I left CIA to start a company that reverse engineered what the Chinese government was censoring in the information environment, with DARPA as a partner. And some of our Indo-Pacific partners were some of the first folks that handled that transition from that technology from DARPA. I was really interested when I was in government in the intersection of open source and national security, and kind of going outside and being able to use the tech, access to the data, access to things, was a way that I could get after the problem faster. Fast forward to 26, 26 acquired the company about 2.5 years ago, and I took over their Information Advantage business unit. So we do all things I/O, everything from collecting the information to analyzing it to actually acting in the information environment, and then assessing the effects of things that either Blue or adversaries are doing in the information space. 26 itself is a couple of things. We're focused on great power competition in general. We are focused on leading-edge technology with focus specifically in cyber, I/O, zero trust, and data science. as well as secure comms. And we're looking specifically at how we get that tech to mission fast. So we're also about hacking the business model that is the government procurement process that we all wrestle with. By design, 2.6 is built around 6 entrepreneurial companies. And so I'm one of the entrepreneurs, but there are several others, and that culture infuses everything we do, whether it's thinking about great power competition, or thinking about the technology, or thinking about how to get things to mission fast, which is often where AI comes in. So because we come from an entrepreneurial perspective, one of the things I'd encourage you to look at is one of the theses that is floating around in the startup space, and the framing about AI is that AI is like water. And the concept there is that if you think about water in the world, it can come from your garden hose, or you can pay $5 a bottle for Fiji. Actually, I'm not sure how much Fiji water goes for. And there's various other sorts of water ways that bottled water has been kind of contained overall. And so as we think about AI, instead of thinking about it as one special thing over here, over there that someone's going to do, it's going to be something that infuses everything everywhere, and thinking about how it is packaged becomes important. And for the warfighter, I'd encourage you to think about a couple things in that context. One of those is, what's your purpose? Just like water, you're going to use a different kind of water to wash your car than you are to, say, baptize your child. And so thinking about the purpose about it, about what you're doing with AI, then helps you figure out what kind of AI you might need. A lot of times we run to the newest and greatest tech, which is fun and interesting, but often you only need the garden hose AI if you're washing your car. And so being clear up front about what you need means that you can certainly be examining the newest tech, but you should be thinking about, maybe I don't need the latest and greatest, I need what works or what is a workhorse. The second thing I'd flag on this is data, AI is like water, is data, to Trey's point. So we are big proponents of all AI is only as good as the data that you put into it, and what you collect, how you collect it, how you label it is really important. I don't know if there's any XKCD fans in the audience. If not, I'd encourage you to take a look. It's a cartoon. They've got a great image that I would have shared today, but it's essentially 2 guys who are standing in front of a bunch of robots that have all been kind of killed. And the one guy says to the other guy, what happened? I thought the robot apocalypse would win. And he said, well, they had bad training data because the robots had showed up with like arrows and clubs instead of machine guns. And so that goes back to sort of the data and thinking about that. And so back to AI is like water, thinking about that data becomes important because it infuses everything that you've got. And the third thing, if we think about AI like water, that I would encourage folks to think about is the reality that humans need to trust the systems. We can't fight that. It's just the way we are cognitively, and so we need to build and think about AI in a way that allows us to cognitively engage with the AI itself. So think about something like an OODA loop. A decision loop is a good framework where we pause between each step to allow people to think about what is it that you are doing? What is it that we've done in this step? We've taken a step with the AI, now let's check. And this is how we do it with humans too, right? So at the agency, CIA, when I was managing analysts, I wouldn't let an analyst write a thing and then it went straight to the president's desk. We had checks and balances to make sure, because sometimes my analyst hallucinated, and that's totally fine, right? They're new, they need to figure things out, and so just like we have built in human processes to manage our own thinking, similarly, we need to do the same thing with AI, and that's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean AI isn't working or it's not effective or can't be used, but it needs to be used in partnership. So I'll leave you with that, at least for opening kind of framework, how to think about, or at least how we're thinking about it at 2.6.
There we go. Thank you. I love that analogy, and that should have generated at least 5 questions out there. So I really do. I want to get out to the audience and talk about what you want to talk about as we go through that. But rounding out the panel is the director of Excovera's Center for Intelligence, Research, and Analysis. Tung Ho, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, General, and I'll Venmo me the 25 cents here in cash.
It's going to be a great Christmas party.
I am also a retired Navy veteran, 25 years, and for about 25 years, back half of my Navy career till now, I've been working with and countering the Chinese, and that's the kind of perspective I like to bring to this discussion. So I served out here in INDOPACOM for about 4 years in the China Strategic Focus Group and in the J5, and then got dual-hatted in the J2, so I have INDOPACOM experience. And again, when I moved over to Exovera, it was because Exovera is also doing research against the Chinese and the Russian adversarial threat. And one of the largest parts that we've been working on lately specifically is how the Chinese and Russians view our efforts in AI compared to their efforts in AI, and how they want to actually counter our advances. And so hopefully I can contribute a little bit later on that discussion topic. And thank you very much.
Yeah, that's very interesting. As we heard from General Flynn at lunch today, the Secretary of Defense comment about China being the pacing item for this theater. And so how are we going to, as we said with this topic, take AI and machine learning and make it a warfighting imperative as we look at this theater as we go forward. Trey, I was very interested in what you said. I'm with you. It's all about the data.
Yes, ma'am.
At the end of the day as we get there. So what are the biggest data challenges faced in INDOPACOM theater in implementing an AI and a hybrid cloud solution? And how is industry addressing this challenge and supporting our warfighters out here?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I've got this theory, and the theory is that, okay, this is audience participation. We'll see if you went to PME. Who's heard of a revolution in military affairs? Have you heard that phrase before? A couple folks who went to PME. So, it's an academic cliche argument, that you have in the halls of your professional military education, institutions. But the idea is that throughout the course of history, certain advances in technology have changed the character of warfare so much that we fight differently. And so, and we call those, the idea, the phrase came about like in the 90s, but we call those revolutions in military affairs. And examples include, and this is where everybody gets into arguments. Yeah, it was, no, it wasn't. But, examples can include like the longbow. They include, machine guns, gunpowder, tanks, nuclear weapons, space, precision-guided munitions. Those are all examples of potential previous revolutions in military affairs. And I would argue that right now, we're in the midst of a revolution in military affairs, and that's driven by data. There's always been data, information in the battle space, but there's never been as much data as there is today globally. And so the challenge is that the data is usually, in its raw form, not very usable. And so the DoD in 2020 published a data strategy. If you haven't read it, check it out. And it uses the term VALTUS to describe data. And VALTUS stands for visible, accessible, understandable, linked, trusted, interoperable, and secure. And so that's what the DoD says your data should, those are the characteristics of data in the DoD. We want data to be visible, accessible, understandable, linked, trusted, interoperable, and secure. And today, when I think about data, I'll give you an example of data, right? So think about a radar sends out some electromagnetic radio waves, it hits something and it comes back and it gives you a signal, it says there's something there. That data is like, a great analogy is petroleum, right? So it's just data, it's there. We tell you, there's something there. But there's a lot of information inside of that data. And so what we need to do is refine that petroleum. We need to process that petroleum. We need to configure, label, tag, enhance that petroleum so it can be used to produce what it is that we need to produce, our data products, right? Whether that's gasoline, whether that's clothing, whether it's plastic, whether it's plastic water bottles. We've got to refine it, we've got to use it, and that's the importance of the data platform. And so that's, in my mind, one of the things that the industry isn't really, nobody talks about, nobody really cares about, nobody goes, I want a good data platform. Most folks, I didn't know data platforms existed. I didn't even know what it was 2 or 3 years ago. But the most successful tools that we have out there, whether it's an AI model or whether it's an application, is only usable, is only successful, it only works if you have refined data. And so, so that's why I think, our focus from the industry side needs to be not on just writing the code. Writing the code, especially now with, products like ChatGPT that can help you write pretty basic code. My son's he's a sophomore in Florida State. He writes pretty good code, and he could probably write some better code than what the Air Force is using right now in some of our ops centers. But it's useless if you don't have refined data. And so I think that's one of the biggest and most important things that industry is doing, and it's certainly our focus at RAFT, is in producing high-quality data through our data platforms that can be used by anybody, anybody's application, anybody's system, anybody's algorithms.
Yeah. So let's go to our coder and just continue that discussion, especially for the warfighter integration here in a complicated theater. And I thought General Flynn laid that out very well over the lunch presentation. But how can our AI solutions be designed to directly support the warfighter in this complex environment in the code that you write? And then, especially when we're in this theater of high stakes, low latency environments, probably one of our most challenging theaters.
Okay, now we're talking. I'm no good at intros, but I'm good at talking about what I do. So, INDOPACOM. If you look at a globe, half of it is INDOPACOM. All right, so it covers the whole Pacific, more than half of the Indian Ocean, and all the land around there. 370,000 military personnel and civilians. And then the warfighters, got to keep them safe. That's a lot of code. Somebody has to write all that code. Or you have to find tools that can do what all those programmers are going to do for you. Low code, no code solutions. These are all human skills. ChatGPT is a good tool, but it's not ready for prime time yet. The Department of Defense is looking for tools that will eventually someday be able to augment that. If you think about the F-16 today, programs that I write, and people like me write, use augmented reality, such that when the pilot swivels his head right now, the face mask that he wears, it actually, the missiles that they fire are aligned with the face mask. So when it fires, it traces, and that missile follows his face mask. So if you watch like the old Top Gun movies where it was pure line of sight, that's no longer the case anymore. The missile will follow his face mask. And that's all coders like me. That is a lot of data. That is sub-millisecond data. So that's tremendously fast ingest tools. And all those tools matter. So if you think about a tactical edge platform in a format that is a warfighter situation and a disconnected situation such that you lose communications, you still need that augmented reality system. So you need your weapons to fire, and you need that missile to hit your target. So you need all those solutions to still work. And you need those models to function, even when your systems go down. So this is the next generation. This is what we need to work today. We need it to work tomorrow, and it needs to get better and better and faster and faster. And all this data that continually comes in, it has to continually stay up to date. It has to stay non-biased, and it has to be able to almost think, such that when the same pilot were to drop a weapon, it has to be able to differentiate between what it is, like the target that it's dropping a weapon on. Because today, you can't punish a robot. You can't give it human thought. And so this leads into ethical considerations and legal legal ramifications. So these are things that have to be taken into account. And then for futuristic concerns, we also have quantum cryptography that has to be taken into account, and quantum key distribution to basically keep all of these communications safe farther on down the road.
That is great. And so as you bring it up, and this is something that we spend a lot of time talking about as a panel, ethical considerations. So Ed, how should ethical considerations be balanced with the rapid deployment of AI, ML technologies in military operations, especially in a theater as complex as INDOPACOM? And I'm going to add to that, and our adversaries don't follow the same ethical rules.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for having me, and excited to talk about this topic. I think before delve into kind of components of that question, I think it's important to step back and define what ethical AI is. So at the highest level, ethical AI is the development and use of AI that prioritizes ethics and values over policy and legal requirements. The purpose is to use it in a way that prevents harm, is used safely and responsibly, and promotes societal good. This has been a conversation that's not new, and it's been looked at through a number of lenses. The first is bias, there's transparency, there's privacy, accountability, sustainability, and human oversight. Bias is probably the most prevalent when we think about ethical AI, and I think somebody mentioned it earlier, is that an algorithm model is only as good as the engineer or developer that builds it. And so a lot of the bias that we hold at the human level is then transferred into the algorithm, therefore influencing what the outcome can be or the recommendation could be. The second around transparency is really, especially when we think about the AOR, if we're going to rely on an AI to provide a recommendation or outcome that could lead to conflict or potentially loss of life, how can we trust that algorithm, right? How do we know that it's been trained on enough data? Do we know that it's been verified, tested? And so all of those lenses are important, one being human oversight, which I'll get to in a moment. But I think what's interesting is that in the last year or so, the conversation around ethical AI has actually been elevated and is almost now being analogous or being used interchangeably with human rights. And so I wanted to read a quote here from the OMB and Executive Order on Safe, Secure, Trustworthy Development and Use of AI. It is necessary to hold those developing and deploying AI accountable to standards that protect against unlawful discrimination and abuse, including the justice system and the federal government. Only then can Americans trust AI to advance civil rights, civil liberties, equity, and justice for all. And so, given that the stakes have risen, right, and we're kind of using ethical AI in the same kind of sentences as human rights, how do we do that, right? I think the one thing that we can't forget when we're thinking about AI is there's always a human element to it. And I think it's a little bit broader than those who've, I'm sure, heard the term human in the loop, where there's an individual involved during the development process and before a decision is made. But really, when you think about the human element, it's really about beyond just the developer or the end user. It's really about society, right, and the impact that AI can have and sort of the ramifications or the value that it can provide. And as models get more mature and get more fidelity, there can be the danger that we can blindly trust AI, right? Like I kind of have a very low stakes analogy of that, but I was coming down Kalakaua Avenue today, probably I've done that drive 100 times. I know that if I just drove 5 blocks down, I would have got here, but instead I have it in my navigation and I blindly trusted the navigation to take me on this, God knows where I went, but then I ended up coming 20 minutes later. But it does make you think that I knew where I was going, but yet I followed the navigation system and it took me in a way that probably wasn't what I needed, and I got here later than I expected. But then when you ramp that up to the stakes that we're talking about, it's really important. So how do we map back to defense and national security? Well, you know, when we're talking about autonomy, we're talking about battle management systems, joint fires, working with partners and allies, I think we all can agree that ethics is paramount. The interesting thing is that the OMB regulations that are provided by the government largely don't apply to DoD and the intelligence community because of the unique nature of the mission, and also because of the classification level. But it doesn't mean that those organizations have not begun to think through ethical AI and how they do that. And there's a few areas that DoD and intelligence community has begun to look at ethical AI, and I'll touch upon a few of those. The first is around we have to have a disciplined governance structure. So there needs to be policies, procedures that incentivize and promote accountability. The second is, it's not different than when you're building a system when you talk about end users, but it's really about building warfighter trust, right? So as we are using more AI within the mission sets and we're asking our warfighters to use it, we have to build that trust. So we have to ask, is there enough user feedback? Has it been tested thoroughly? Has it been validated? Is there confidence scores so that we can build that trust? The next is around requirements. So we have to bake in requirements at every part of an organization and it has to be traceable from top down, and those are ethical considerations. The next one is around stakeholder collaboration. So we need to build an ecosystem that is national, global, with multiple stakeholders, some being not some, but definitely our partners and allies, so that we're having the right conversation and we can come to some shared values and perspectives. And the last, which is really important, is around building, equipping, and training an AI-ready workforce or an ethical AI-ready workforce. So for Booz Allen, we're the largest AI provider for the federal government. We have 35,000 employees, but it doesn't mean that the challenge stops, right? Is that you have to keep your workforce current. As you get trusted to build solutions for the government and for our clients, how we're responsibly deploying those solutions is important. That's paramount within our team. The last thing I'll kind of talk through is that, Susan, when the question is about is how do we balance baking in ethics when we have to move fast, right? And we shouldn't think of ethical AI as a hindrance as we start to adopt it or adopt it at scale. We just discussed the importance of it. We're going to continue to discuss the importance of it about keeping up with our adversaries, but we cannot ignore the risk if we don't bake in ethics within our development. And as I said, I'm not a classically trained AI engineer, but being a lifelong technologist, if you were building a system, right, you wouldn't ignore quality or security or wait until the very end. That's analogous to when you thinking about ethics, right? It has to be a constant question. You don't want to ignore to wait till the end. The former brings about something I think we all heard it called technical debt. And I'd venture to say that if you don't think about ethics, then you're going to build ethical debt within your organization as well. And I was just talking about this panel with a colleague of mine, and was talking about this idea of pace, right? And how do you make sure it doesn't hinder? And he had a great thought, and his thought was ethical AI should never slow us down. We need to think of it as a seatbelt and not a speed bump.
Yeah. Team, we talked about this a lot when we were doing the, any other panelists have comments on this, on this ethical considerations that we're looking at?
I think I would really just echo so many things. I'm not sure I can add to that, but I think the seatbelt analogy I think is a good one, and this idea that it's a secondary thing that gets tacked on I think is an unfortunate framing that sometimes people have used, that like we can't stop. Either one, the community is above this, we don't have to think about it, or our mission's too important, we have to move forward. But again, back to my comment, like these are things we've already wrestled with as humans, and they are built into our human systems. There's no reason we shouldn't also build them into our AI systems. So we expect our humans that are doing these missions to follow certain rules of ethics, and building it into the AI should just be standard the same way we would address it for the training that we do for the people that we put on the front lines.
So from the coding perspective, it's not that simple because there's morally wrong and there's legally wrong. And when you build these models on a geo scale, because again, I work for exascale clients, so you have to abide by the law of every nation, and the morality of every nation is also different. So those models, they vary for every nation. So this is unbelievably complex. This is very, very hard. This is really, really hard code.
I like the analogy of ethical debt to technical debt. I think that's a great way of thinking about it. I wonder if, with technical debt, as you're building out a system, at some point, you're not going to proceed until you've addressed your technical debt. With ethical debt, I worry that the models, especially if you're building, they're using machine learning, that it could proceed without addressing the ethical debt. And then has it gained such momentum that you can't catch up?
Yeah, and I think that's where the idea, when I mentioned you have to hold yourself to a higher standard and have that skepticism. There is the danger to blindly follow, right, in AI, but I think you have to have that discourse within the organization, and there has to be mechanisms that incentivize, but also kind of bake in where you can question, right, and you can ask, is it producing what we actually need it to produce, or is it actually taking us down a path in which we can't come back from?
It's good
So I'm going to go over to you, Tung, because your background and work inside of China, obviously you had to address some of these things as you went through that. But as we look at the overall trends, development in China, is there any insights into the efforts to develop anti-AI technology and capabilities given our adversary?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. One thing that's going to be different about my approach to this question is it's not going to be, as the other panelists were expressing their views, of their own views or their company's views or even what the AI community's views should be on topics. This is a consolidated view of what we have, at Exovera have found are the Chinese views on this topic and how they are trying to say break the trust in our data or figure out how to modify the ethics of the AI to their advantage in some way. So I'm going to try to hit the wave tops. I wanted to give enough information so that we can have a broad discussion. So it's going to be just going to read off some information. You're probably very aware of a lot of this information. And so I'll just kick it off. So I'm going to try to cover several areas which will provide the context of the Chinese anti-AI effort. Each area can be covered in depth, but I'm going to try to hit just the wave tops so that we can get a perspective and go right into a discussion about this. I also am not an AI expert. I cannot code. So if there's any kind of technical questions, the esteemed panelists to my right can take those on. Exovera conducts open source research exclusively, and we gather data on a wide range of subjects. These areas focus on geostrategic or political military, due diligence, supply chain type of information. But recently, we've had a very heavy focus on the artificial intelligence. We work with the DoD, the IC, commercial customers, and others to help them understand the global AI environment that they're working in. With the focus, of course, on China and Russia. And for this panel, it'll be exclusively on China. One caveat for this information is it is actually all based on Chinese sources. So the information presented will be the Chinese perspective using the Chinese language. So it will not necessarily reflect exactly the lexicon that we're used to when we talk about AI in the Western setting. One specific thing, the term anti-AI in the question. That is actually more aligned along the US term counter-AI, right? It is not AI is used in the context of like the ethics, right? Where, as opposing viewpoints to the rapid progress of AI without careful consideration of its consequences. That's anti-AI in US terminology. Or anti-AI technology aimed to address those risks by providing oversight, security, and control mechanisms tailored for AI systems, like the safeguards we were talking about. This specifically is based on counter-AI trends in China. All right, so as a follow-on to the 13th five-year plan issued by the Chinese State Council after 2016, the State Council in 2017 announced the Next Generation Artificial Intelligence Development Plan. A plan calls for China to be the preeminent innovation center for AI by 2030. Additionally, under this plan, China's AI theory, technology, applications will all reach world-leading levels. Right, so that's a proclamation. Chinese political and technical leaders have also stated, and I'll use quotes, AI is a, quote, new focus of international competition, end quote. Quote, AI is the main battlefield between China and the US. So this is where it's becoming Debbie Downer type stuff. Generative pre-trained transformers, GPTs, remain the, quote, main battlefield. And they talk about this a lot. AI is a, quote, major strategic opportunity for China to take the first mover advantage. In terms of artificial general intelligence, which I'll cover at the very end, quote, AI competition with the US has crossed a singularity and collided a crucial point. Word salad, but it's a big deal to them. AGI is an area of, quote, extreme strategic competition. And this is all in relation to the United States, not necessarily just the West. AGI is, quote, fundamental evolution of war. Okay, that's an AGI, artificial general intelligence, not the GPTs. So China is focused on integrating AI advances from commercial and academic efforts into its military power at a greater scale than we are, using its civil military fusion programs. I will not cover that today, but there is also a lot of research on that topic. Many in the Chinese AI community believe that they can achieve superiority in the AI domain very shortly, though they still predominantly believe that they're behind us today. So as far as funding goes, and let's just throw out some numbers to show what the resources are being devoted to AI and anti-AI. According to Chinese sources, China's AI industry market size was over $80 billion in 2023. They expect that the market size would grow to about $240 billion by 2035. For what it's worth, the Chinese government announced that it has over 4,500 domestic AI companies. In terms of funding, China still trails U.S. and private AI investment. Various sources indicate the U.S. Is behind us by about an order of magnitude as of 2023. And these numbers vary, but it's about $70 billion of private investment in the United States and about $7 billion of private investment in China. And the scale is similar for AI startup capital, like venture funding. So where does Chinese AI programs make up the funding shortfalls? Well, a great deal of it comes from the government. Tens of billions of US dollars in grants from the central, provincial, and local governments, and that's a common theme you're going to hear throughout, is that there's a national level programs, and typically the provinces and the municipalities will also have programs that are fully integrated supporting their AI programs. Actual budget figures are a little bit incomplete due to, obviously, lack of transparency that was built in some cases. By 2022, China had over 2,100 government guidance funds. That's the proper term for that fund. They targeted 1.86 trillion US dollars worth of funding available through these guidance funds. We found reporting that said they have achieved $980 billion in these funds as of this year. The Chinese index also stated that in 2023, China led the world in AI research publications, publishing about 37% of all of them. The US came in second at about 23%. And we won't go into qualitative analysis on those numbers. However, the US and China are roughly equal in the number of generative AI articles and publications. So on that specific generative AI topic, we're pretty much equal. Of note, the release date and capabilities of GPT, such as OpenAI's ChatGPT and other GPTs, were viewed with a little bit of unhappy surprise by the China AI community. They had not predicted that that capability and that timeline were achievable, so they reassessed their position in the AI competition and then redoubled their efforts. On some of the efforts that they've taken under the Next Generation AI Development Plan, on data, there's too many data initiatives that we could have tables and tables of all the different initiatives within China and how they're developing data sources, cleaning it, producing it, storing it, and sharing it. But it, again, is at a national, provincial, and municipal levels. And they're using a lot of resources and manpower and technical power to actually have the best data sets in the world. There are many competing LLM data sets and models that they compete amongst themselves to try to have the exemplar Chinese language model and language model sets. They are still competing. And they also want to compete with these data sets in the international market. And going back to, I think, some of the ethical things, there are some findings that they will not allow their language models to actually produce. And so you have to understand what kind of ethics that have to be built into their data sets to create what is always pro-Communist Party. Okay. On computing power, China's development compute power is supported, again, at the national level. They expect to have, by 2026, 360 exaflops of computing power, and they expect about 25 to 30% of that devoted specifically to AI resources. And if anyone up here has different numbers than that, please do chime in. I don't even have an understanding of what 360 exaflops would be. One thing I will add as a specific note is they are actually already getting to the point where we are, right, where we are actually looking at nuclear power all over again to support the processing power that's required to do the AI work that we want our programs to do. They also understand this, and they're investing in this in more efficient chips, more efficient ways of transmitting the power, or offshoring it. For talent, the Chinese AI workforce has been estimated to be about 1 million currently, but they are actually still struggling with brain drain. Okay. Even though they create the highest number of undergraduate level AI workers and researchers, the United States and the West still produce the greatest number of postgraduate researchers and workforce. And the Chinese also recognize that a lot of their workforce chooses not to go back after they achieve those levels. And again, they're working on that. The central government issued an action plan to enhance AI talent and AI curricula by 2030. That plan is to train, provide work opportunities, and includes subsidies such as for housing and sign-on bonuses for the entire AI workforce. The central government plan is augmented by provincial and municipal initiatives to recruit, train, and retain AI talent and workforce. Overall, the AI community in China believes that they are still behind the United States in LLMs and language models such as that. But they believe that because they are more aggressive in integrating their AI into industry and commercial applications, that they will create a better environment to actually exceed what we can achieve at a faster pace. Now, as far as the anti-AI, again, counter-AI. For the anti-AI discussion, I'm not including the strategy, research, and development of AI as a capability to create a effect, not as AI as a weapon or AI as a way of countering us. Rather, I'm talking about how the Chinese intend to counter our data sets and our actual AI itself. Back in mid-2023, Exovera published a report finding explicitly that the Chinese were very much aware of and seeking to counter DoD-specific AI. Open source material also shows that Chinese military scientists study U.S. military AI technologies and their vulnerabilities and challenges, including AI systems being developed by DARPA, the U.S. Air Force, U.S. Navy, and the U.S. Army. Chinese military scientists also study the countermeasures to both overcome and exploit these vulnerabilities in AI systems, so to protect their own systems, but also attack ours. Chinese academic journals also discuss anti-artificial intelligence as a new form of warfare to counter DoD AI capabilities. Exovera has not found any specific anti or counter AI technology that is new or the term that we do not find repeated in the West. Common methods that are included in the journals and research are enhanced black box and white box attacks, enhanced attacks against rank aggregation, enhanced attacks on speech recognition systems, attacks on object detection machine learning algorithms, adversarial embedded and batch image steganography, black box attacks against image data for facial recognition and object detection, data poisoning, and poison attack. So sorry for the Debbie Downer stuff. Of note, there is research and discussion on, both as employing these methods as defense and as attack, but there is a slight predominance in research focused on the attack vectors. Exovera also found that the following institutions are the most prolific publishers of the subject on anti-AI. We determined this by using our own internal databases, the China National Knowledge Infrastructure, which is CNKI, for most of the China folks maybe out in the audience, probably very familiar with that. IEEE, Chinese corporate records in Chinese, business prospectus in Chinese, Chinese media, and Chinese versions of university websites, which differ from the ones we can actually get to in the West. These leading universities and government research organizations in order are, and some of these probably will be familiar because for people that work on AI, we actually collaborate with most of these organizations on a very high level. China Academy of Sciences, Tsinghua University, National University of Defense Technology, University of Science and Technology of China, Pengcheng Laboratory, Army Engineering University of the PLA, and the Information Engineering University, which used to be under the PLA Strategic Support Force, but our research shows it has now transferred over to the PLA Cyberspace Force. And those, again, are the ones that their publications were more open and shared. We also have profiles of these organizations, but we also have journals, research, and entity consolidations for PLA and PLA-affiliated research organizations and the research itself, but that is a lot less because they obviously hide it. For purpose of time, I will not go through the actual examples that we found, but I will close with a little bit of specifics on artificial general intelligence, which we were finding information of as we actually were getting ready for this panel. There is obviously growing Chinese interest in artificial general intelligence. In April 2023, the Politburo, the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party, issued an official statement. That is a big deal. Specifically, the Politburo resolved to, quote, attach importance to the development of artificial general intelligence, create an innovation ecosystem, and pay attention to mitigating risks. The reason this is a significant milestone is because the Next Generation Artificial Intelligence Development Plan of 2017 had not addressed artificial general intelligence other than as an area of research that could be conducted in the future, one reference. Now they have 9 additions to the NDAI-DP that were proposed in March of 2024. So they kind of shifted not only to from the anti-AI, but to trying to be also predominant in AGI. And many Chinese researchers estimate that true AGI can probably be achieved within about 20 years, although there's still disagreement. And that's all I have.
Well, that's quite a bit. That was great, and very interesting from the perspective from our adversaries who go through that. Becky, I'm going to come back to you in a minute here and talk about risks again on this. But Ben, any questions from the audience?
Yes, ma'am. We do have some questions back here. The first question, there are numerous C2 systems incorporated in a typical command operations center. What is private industry doing to incorporate AI/ML-derived data from different systems to assist the commander and staff warfighters to have a greater ability to paint a more in-depth and accurate solution to various decision-making problems?
Well, that kind of was my questions to you, Becky, so I'm going to let you start that off as we talk about inside of the operational domain here in the Indo-Pacific, and as they're incorporating these, what are their near-term risks?
Yeah, so this is a tough one. I think, well, there's sort of 2 questions. There's a question that's been asked, which is related to kind of pulling out a unified view or an accurate picture, and the risks associated with that. I think that you've heard from many of us, all of us here in private industry, a lot of us are focused on data and thinking about how we can get these different data sets together and to speak one language. I think that, so some of those conversations are happening industry to industry, driven by demands like this. The commander needs to see one view. How do we get that into a common picture? Having those conversations. I think the ones that have been successful is where the government gives a little bit of leeway. Ones that I've seen that are not successful are when very strict ontologies are written, where the idea is that, like, hey, if I just tell the humans all of the rules and write them in detail, like, they'll follow the rules. And it's not that we, private industry, don't want to follow the rules. It's that humans are humans, and we can't pre-know all of the things or ways that we're going to need to structure the data in order for it to solve the mission. And so we end up getting bogged down in discussions and arguments sometimes about what an ontology should look like. An ontology is a set of rules, essentially, like think of like a dictionary, rather than getting after just like, let's get the data in and try to do a thing. I think the other thing that the industry and government is often working hard on is trying to figure out what is that common picture. I don't know about the other folks on the panel, but many of the government partners I talk to have different ways they like to consume information. This is normal. Everyone has a slightly different mission with slightly different need, sometimes slightly different personal preferences. I mean, this is why so many commercial apps allow individual users to customize their user design. But that also makes it challenging. We can't custom build everything because it just doesn't scale. As we've talked about, coding this stuff is really hard. And if we try to do that individually, we just don't get the economies of scale. We're not going to be able to move at the speed that we've talked about. But at the same time, there needs to be some level of customization. So I think, at least certainly at 2.6, and I think I know from some of the other folks in the panel, we're working on ways to get to sort of the 80% so that we can move fast and there's something that's already built and we're not building from the ground up, and sort of getting to a place where that last 20% can be customized for whatever the individual mission is. I haven't even gotten to the risk question, which is a whole discussion. But what I'd suggest actually, if we maybe go to the other folks on in terms of private industry doing for this question, I'm happy to come back on the risks.
Trey, did you have something?
Yeah, I think that this is a great question, and I think I'm going to offer 2 different thoughts here. The first is that, as Becky alluded to earlier, and Dr. Melvin has talked about also, I think that we throw the term around AI tools. You know, we need an AI tool. And I think that a lot of times you don't need an AI tool. You need some really good automation. You need some really good code. And so I think we've got to be clear about what it is that we need. And so I think that there's a partnership there, right? So the government defines requirements. We have conversations about that. So we need to define the right requirement for the tools that we need. The second, the second challenge we have is that we develop these new tools, and oftentimes these new tools don't have the authority to operate on a government weapon system, right? And so the newest and the best tools and the newest and the best code, it takes years sometimes to get the authority to operate. And so one of the challenges we have is writing the code and developing programs in a way that is going to be, that can quickly be ATO'd. But the second thing we could ask, in partnership with the government is to, help us help you by delegating, down those authorities, approving official authorities. And you can do that. And I think we've grown up in this military that, it's got to be a 07 or above who can be the authorizing official. And while that's true, there are a lot of ways to delegate that and make that decision making at a lower level where you can more rapidly onboard the newest and the best technology so that when Dr. Melvin writes a good code, we don't have to wait 3 years to get it on the program.
Right. Ben, let's take another question.
Okay, the next question. We assume that malicious actors have penetrated our critical infrastructure systems. Do we assume the same about military AI data or models, and how do we prevent or mitigate these breaches?
I'll start. I think we have to assume that, right? There is something called adversarial AI. And so the same way in which we would look at systems or data and how we protect it, and how we harden them, and how we think through about going from a defensive posture to an offensive posture, I think we have to do the same when we're thinking about algorithms, right? If we get into a contested environment, everything's open, right? In a sense, right? Everything's fair game in terms of what our adversaries are going to come after. So I think the way that we architect data solutions is no different than how we architect and protect systems and battle management systems.
And one of the things I did not read out was that one of the pieces of research we found was that they are studying camouflage node injection attacks, okay, assuming that they're already looking at better ways to do it, which makes the injection node attacks appear normal or undetectable to graph neural networks. 50% of that I understood what that was about. But I read that as they already have ways of penetrating, they're just making it unattributable.
Yeah, so most of the research that I do on quantum can't be discussed, obviously. But what I can say is a lot of it is contradictory to what I just heard down there. But his is specifically on generative AI. The work that I do and the research that I work in on China is on quantum. And it shows that quantum is about a decade ahead of us. China is about a decade ahead of us on quantum. And that's specifically because they never fought a war on terror. So all of our money went to fighting a war on terror, all of our time, our energy. And so they leapt ahead of us on that. And that's problematic because researchers like me who work in crypto, so this question, this is my field, this is crypto. I work in quantum crypto. And China, on August 13th, they broke military crypto using quantum. Like a $250,000 quantum computer, and that's a big deal. So that just shows how far ahead they are, and that's all public research. It hit mainstream news. So this is a big deal. So yeah, this is where industry needs to focus. So this is definitely NIST published quantum crypto just a few weeks ago. FIPS standards are out there. They are going to be law within the next few years. I would say it's going to be accelerated after what just happened, 2 weeks ago. And and so quantum researchers are really going to be pushed hard.
I know this is focused on AI, but yes, the quantum thing is significant and scary. 'Cause I also read the NIST post-quantum encryption thing. The fact that if they can actually break the encryptions, whether or not we have post-quantum encryption or not, all the material we have classified will be available to them as soon as they can break it.
Okay. I'm going to take the liberty of the last question as we get close on our time here. So Becky, what are some of the most significant near-term risks associated with over-reliance on AI and ML?
Well, I think we just talked about one of them.
Yes, we did.
What I was going to add to that is that because we were also seeing the same thing even before this most recent debacle, we had done a market analysis on the market for AI assurance sort of solutions, and depressingly, the market people came back and said there's not a market for it yet. Dollars aren't being spent. So we hope that changes for exactly the reason you've outlined, but it is, one thing I just want to say out loud is that private industry does sort of scan to see where requirements are, and it's one thing to say that, but it's another thing to put money behind it. And so that was one of those, again, we may do this again after this most recent news, but when we did that market assessment about 6 months ago, it's not where people are spending their dollars. So I think that's one of the risks, which is being aware of things. But back to the global war on terror issue, how do we move those monies and move the processes and all those things fast enough so that we can get after many of the things that you've outlined and that we've discussed here today? So that's one risk, another type of risk. And so you're hearing me not talk so much about the scary things that we all see on like Hollywood producing of all the, again, back to the robot apocalypse. Those are certainly things that could happen and can happen, but I think there are nearer term risks that are more process related, more policy related, and more people related. One of the things that we've been thinking about and is thinking about how to mitigate or sort of frame those risks when we think about models. Many of the evaluation frameworks that are developed to evaluate models assume that there's a right, or we're talking about truth or facts. And so they're designed to evaluate whether it was factually right. But most of the stuff that scares us the most and that will have the biggest impact are not things where it's going to be about a fact. It's going to be about something where judgment is involved. And those require different kinds of evaluation models. And so we've started thinking about, okay, well, what are the other kind of components of an evaluation model that is trying to evaluate the risk related to given models? And for example, we'll look at a couple different things. One is the model itself and sort of the degradation of the model. So models drift, right? If you train a model to do something, as the information changes or whatever it's supposed to do, it will often drift, assuming the underlying thing that you're modeling also changes over time. This is often easiest to think about in like a news cycle. The news changes, the model drifts, but it can also be true in other sorts of areas as well. So depending on how much a model drifts, the more or the faster it drifts, the more risk is associated with that model. And so you need to then make sure you're budgeting for renewing that model on a regular basis. That's sort of the first step. The second step might be, okay, is there an actual way to include a human in the process? If there is, great, that might help correct that sort of model drift, and that would reduce the risk. If there's not, back to the example that Dr. Melvin gave of like a millisecond thing, there's not necessarily a human going to be in that process, then the risk is higher. And then a third component is the subjectivity of the task the model's being assigned. How much subjectivity, how much judgment could be possibly involved? Again, the higher the amount of subjectivity, the riskier that model and the more oversight or more risk in that sense, the lower. And so combining these three things together helps get a more nuanced as opposed to, did it get this fact right or wrong? Which frankly just isn't the kind of thing that we're talking about here.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
So the question is, what are the risks of over-reliance on AI? And I think that the greater risk is under-reliance, underutilization of AI. I think that we are we're so worried about AI ethical considerations and is the model wrong and I can't use it, it's not fully trained yet and so I'm not going to buy it, you know. And I think that because one of the, defining features of AI is it learns and it gets better over time, if we don't start using and training these models now, we are never going to catch up. We are never going to catch up. And in a fight that has the scale of a fight with China, the side that uses that data, the side that makes faster decisions is the side that's going to win. And if we want to make faster decisions, we have to leverage artificial intelligence. And to do that, we need to start training the models now. We can't wait for a perfect model. We can't wait for a perfect program. We got to start training them now. We got to start using them in exercises. We got to start plugging them in. We got to start training and making them better, or we're just going to lose.
And making mistakes. Like, some of this is about doing all of that, and we're going to make mistakes. Like, they're not going to be perfect, and so we need to start using them in exercises so we figure out how it's broken and then fix it. So, yeah, I 100% agree.
Okay, I think we just introduced a whole new topic for another panel. I really, really appreciate all the input. As I said, talking to you earlier and discussing these really hard challenges that are facing us, and how are we going to make up 10 years of time against our adversaries. And to all of you out there in industry, there's your challenge. This is where we need you to assist us in taking on these opportunities. And Trey, I love it. Go on the offense. Let's do this. We got it. So thank you very, very much. Please recognize this amazing panel of experts.
Please welcome Mike Black back to the stage.
Okay, General Lawrence and panelists, on behalf of FCA International and FCA Hawaii, I want to thank you for the time, your time of being with us today. We talked about coding and warfighting. We talked about some ethical integrations. We talked about data challenges, AI integration, the great power AI trends, particularly China. We had some other takeaways here. Can't punish the robot. Moral wrong versus legal wrong. Incidentally, Dr. Melvin is also a lawyer, Juris Doctor as well, so it wasn't surprising that moral and legal came out. We talked about ethical debt and technical debt versus that. We talked about seatbelt versus speed bump. Trey brought in the acronym for us, VALTUS, so look that up, but visible, accessible, understandable, linked, trustworthy, interoperable, and secure. Okay. All right. And then, anti-AI. So what an amazing discussion. As a thank you to our speakers this week, on behalf of AFCEA, we're going to make a donation to the Friends of Windward Wounded Warriors. And in addition, we're going to present each of the panelists with the highly coveted coin. Boss, you get one too.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Just a couple more words and we'll be finished up here. Yes, ma'am.
Everybody, love to see you down on the floor at 3:30, a meeting with our industry partners. We've got an open networking session down there. So let's go see some of these amazing exhibits at 3:30 as well.
Absolutely. Again, I want to thank you for joining us today. There is still a lot of activity, and what I was going to say right after that, boss took it from me, and so you got to get down there and look at the exhibits and engage folks down there. I want to make sure that you have a great rest of the afternoon and evening here in Honolulu, and we look forward to seeing you again later this evening and tomorrow. So thanks again.